Have you ever seen a man who
It's all
lost
right, little
everything
one.
find a heartbeat drifting down a Texas creek?
I'm here.
One moment, a lonely millionaire. The next, a baby's cry changes his life forever. Some stories aren't about money. They're about redemption, love, and the kind of miracle you can't buy. If this touched something in your heart, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about hope. The morning sun had just started to spill across the Texas hills when Ethan Crawford guided his old horse, Ranger, along the edge of Willow Creek. The air smelled like wet earth and cedar, the kind of quiet that could almost fool a man into thinking life was peaceful. But peace was something Ethan hadn't known in 10 long years, ever since the fire took his wife and little boy. He'd come out here just like every other morning, fixing fences and pretending he was fine. The rhythm of work kept him from hearing the silence of that big empty house back on the ridge. But today, that silence ended, with a sound he would never forget. At first, he thought it was a bird, a soft cry cutting through the breeze. Then it came again, weaker this time. He looked down the creek and froze. Something was caught between two branches, something wrapped in burlap, drifting slow as the current. Probably trash, he muttered, sliding off the saddle. But when he stepped into the cold water, the bundle twitched. The sound came again, faint and broken like a whisper. Ethan's pulse hammered. He tore at the wet knot, and when the sack opened, the world stopped breathing. Inside was a baby, pale, soaked. Her lips blue. Her tiny hand lifted once, brushing against his thumb before falling limp. "Oh, Lord," he breathed. Without thinking, he pulled her close to his chest. She was icy, her heartbeat faint but there. Ranger snorted on the bank as Ethan wrapped the baby inside his coat and climbed back into the saddle. "Hang on, little one. Don't you dare quit on me." He pressed her against his heart, feeling the shallow rise and fall of her chest. The ride back to town blurred mud, fences, the wind biting his face. By the time he reached Ashton Valley, his voice was gone from whispering prayers he hadn't said in years. He kicked open the door to Dr. Alan Whitaker's small clinic, startling the old doctor out of his morning coffee. "She's freezing. Found her in the creek," Ethan gasped. Dr. Whitaker's calm turned sharp. "Lay her here." He moved fast blankets, stethoscope, heat lamps. The sound of the monitor filled the room, slow and uneven. Ethan stood frozen, his calloused hands trembling. Minutes crawled. Then, a flicker. The baby's chest lifted deeper, a soft gasp escaping her lips. Her tiny fingers clenched around Ethan's thumb and held on. "She's alive," the doctor said, relief cracking his voice. "Barely, but she's got fight in her." Ethan didn't answer. He was too busy staring at that small hand wrapped around his. Something inside him, the part that had been burned to ashes years ago, shifted. Hours later, when the doctor finally said she was stable, Ethan sat by the crib, watching her breathe. The storm outside had cleared, sunlight pouring through the window onto her damp hair. He whispered, almost to himself, "Guess we both made it out of the fire, huh?" The baby stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For one impossible heartbeat, she looked right at him and made a faint sound that nearly broke him apart. "Mama," Ethan froze, his throat tightened, eyes stinging. He reached out, brushing her cheek with his rough hand. "Not quite, sweetheart," he murmured, voice shaking. "But you're safe now." He didn't know it yet. But that single word, the baby's breath of mama, had just cracked open the quiet life he'd buried himself in. Because somewhere out there, someone knew this child was missing, and they might not be looking to get her back alive. The news spread through Ashton Valley faster than wildfire. The reclusive millionaire Ethan Crawford had carried a half-dead baby into Doc Whitaker's clinic. Folks at the diner whispered that maybe the old man had finally gone soft, while others said it was God's way of giving him a second chance. Ethan didn't care what they said. He hadn't left the clinic for 2 days, afraid that if he blinked, the child might stop breathing again. On the third morning, the baby started to cry thin, desperate wails that echoed through the small building. Nothing soothed her. Ethan rocked, hummed, begged. His voice cracked, and his eyes were raw from sleeplessness. Dr. Whitaker sighed, rubbing his temples. She needs a woman's touch, Ethan. Someone gentle. Someone she can feel safe with. That's when Sarah Monroe appeared. She was passing the clinic on her way to the general store when she heard the crying. A schoolteacher with soft brown hair and eyes that carried their own sadness. Sarah had lost her husband in a car crash and her baby girl to fever 2 years later. She hadn't held another child since. But when she stepped inside and saw the tiny bundle trembling on the table, her heart clenched like it was waking from a long sleep. "Do you want to try?" Dr. Whitaker asked quietly. Sarah hesitated, hands shaking. I don't know if I can." "Just talk to her," Ethan whispered. "Please." Sarah leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. "Hey there, sweetheart," she murmured, humming the lullaby she used to sing to her daughter. "You are my sunshine." The baby's cries faltered. Her lips parted. Then, for the first time since being pulled from the water, she went quiet. Ethan blinked hard. The silence was a miracle. "How'd you do that?" Sarah gave a small, trembling smile. She just needed a voice that remembers love. Over the next few days, Sarah stayed. She taught Ethan how to feed the baby with a bottle, how to test the milk's warmth on his wrist. His hands were clumsy, but his heart learned fast. They called her Hope, because that's what she seemed to bring back into every room she entered. Outside, gossip swirled. People peeked through the clinic window, whispering about the unlikely pair raising a baby together. "He's rich. She's widowed. Lord knows what that means," said Mrs. Jenkins from the bakery. But inside, none of that mattered. Hope began to laugh. Small, breathy giggles that felt like sunlight on their scars. One night, thunder rolled across the valley. Hope burned with fever, her tiny body trembling. Ethan panicked, shouting for the doctor. But Sarah held his shoulders. "Don't run, Ethan. She needs you to stay." The memory of losing his own child burned behind his eyes. "I can't watch another one die." "Yes, you can," Sarah said firmly. "Because you're not the same man anymore." Together they cooled the baby's forehead, whispered prayers neither had spoken in years. When the fever finally broke near dawn, Ethan sagged in his chair, tears streaking his face. Sarah's hand rested over his. The world felt new again. Hope slept peacefully between them, the storm outside fading into soft rain. Ethan whispered, "You saved her." Sarah shook her head. "No, Ethan. Maybe she's saving us." As the first light touched the window, Hope stirred and murmured a single word that made them both stop breathing. "Mama." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan looked at her, eyes wide. Neither of them noticed the shadow outside the figure watching through the rain-streaked glass, a gloved hand lowering a car window to take a photograph. Because somewhere far from Willow Creek, someone had just found out Hope was still alive. Rain swept through Ashton Valley that morning, washing the streets clean but leaving the air heavy with secrets. Inside the schoolhouse, Sarah Monroe was finishing her lesson plans when a knock rattled the door. She opened it to find a trembling woman in a faded gray coat, her dark hair soaked from the rain. "My name is Linda Alvarez," she whispered, clutching her handbag. "I work for Mayor Whitmore, and I can't keep quiet anymore." "Ah." Sarah frowned, ushering her in. The woman's hands wouldn't stop shaking. "It's about that baby, the one you and Mr. Crawford found in the creek. I know who she is." Sarah's pulse jumped. You know her family?" Linda nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She belongs to Rebecca Whitmore, the mayor's daughter. They told everyone she went east for school. But that was a lie. She had a baby, no husband, no ring. The mayor said the scandal would ruin him, He paid a man to make the problem disappear. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Disappear? Linda's voice broke. He told Rebecca the baby died during birth. But I heard them talking. The child was alive. And he ordered someone to take her away. By the time Sarah reached Ethan's ranch, her hands were trembling. Hope was in his arms, babbling and reaching for his beard. When Sarah told him everything, the color drained from his face. He tried to have her killed, Ethan said flatly, eyes dark with fury. And now he's looking for her, to cover his tracks. They sat in silence, thunder rolling across the plains. Hope clapped her hands at the sound, laughing completely unaware that her laughter had just become dangerous. That evening, Sheriff Mark Delaney stopped by with a grim expression. "I just got word from Austin," he said. "Mayor Whitmore sent a private investigator down here. Claims he's looking for a missing infant. A family matter." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He won't get near her. Be careful," the sheriff warned. "The man's got friends in high places. Folks like him don't play fair." Later that night, Sarah sat by Hope's crib, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "You were born into a world that didn't want you," she whispered. "But somehow you found the ones who did." Ethan leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "What happens if they come for her?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes fierce through the lamplight. "Then they'll have to go through us first." He nodded slowly. "Over my dead body." Outside, rain turned to mist. A black car rolled quietly down the dirt road and stopped just beyond the gate. Inside, a man in a tailored suit picked up his phone. "Yes, Mr. Mayor," he said softly. "The child's alive. And I know exactly where she is." Inside the ranch, Hope stirred in her sleep and began to cry. Sarah rushed to lift her. But for a heartbeat, she thought she heard something else. A low hum outside, like an engine that didn't want to leave. She turned to Ethan, fear flickering in her voice. "He's found us, hasn't he?" Ethan didn't answer. He was already reaching for the shotgun, hanging by the door. ChatGPT da noi. By the next morning, word had spread like wildfire across Ashton Valley. The mayor himself was coming to town. People gathered along Main Street as the black Cadillac rolled to a stop in front of Dr. Whitaker's clinic, its chrome gleaming under the Texas Sunday. Ethan Crawford stood waiting, arms folded, jaw set. Sarah Monroe held Hope close, the baby's tiny fingers clutching her necklace. When Mayor Charles Whitmore stepped out, flanked by two men in suits, the quiet murmur of the crowd faded into uneasy silence. "Mr. Crawford," the mayor said, his voice sharp and polished. "I believe you have something that belongs to my family." Ethan didn't move. "If you mean the baby that was left to die in Willow Creek, then you're wrong, sir. She doesn't belong to anyone who'd throw her away." The mayor's gray eyes hardened. "Watch your words. That child is my granddaughter. She will come home with us, where she belongs with her blood, her name, her future." Hope stirred and whimpered at the man's tone. Sarah rocked her gently. "She doesn't even know you," she said softly. "Look at her, she's scared." A door opened behind them, and a young woman stepped out from the car. Rebecca Whitmore. Pale, fragile, her eyes swollen from crying. She whispered, May I hold her?" Sarah hesitated, then slowly passed Hope into her trembling arms. But the moment Rebecca touched her, the baby began to cry, loud, panicked sobs that filled the street. "Mama! Mama!" Rebecca froze. Tears spilled down her face as she handed Hope back to Sarah. "She doesn't know me," she whispered, broken. "My own baby doesn't know me." The mayor's patience snapped. "Enough of this spectacle," he barked. "I've already spoken to Judge Henry Collins in Austin. We'll settle this legally. Family rights will prevail." He turned to his driver. "Prepare the papers. We'll see them in court." Sarah's voice trembled but stood firm. "You can't buy justice, Mr. Whitmore," he smirked. "My dear, in this world, money doesn't buy justice. It is justice. When the Cadillac finally disappeared down the road, the town buzzed with whispers. Sarah clutched Hope to her chest, the child's face buried against her shoulder. They'll take her, Ethan. They'll use the law to do it. Ethan stared at the dust rising behind the departing car. Then we fight. With what they don't have, truth. 3 days later, the Travis County Courthouse in Austin was packed. Reporters, townsfolk, and curious strangers filled every seat. On one side of the courtroom sat the mayor and his high-priced attorney from Dallas. On the other, Ethan and Sarah, with nothing but a small-town lawyer and a child whose laughter could silence the noise of the world. When the bailiff called the session to order, Judge Collins adjusted his glasses and spoke. "This is a custody hearing, not a spectacle. I'll have order, or I'll clear this room." The mayor's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my clients seek the rightful return of their blood relative, Miss Rebecca Whitmore's daughter." Tom Bradley, Ethan's attorney, rose next. "Your Honor, this isn't about blood. It's about the best interest of a child who was abandoned to die. My clients didn't create her life, but they saved it." As if on cue, Hope looked up from Sarah's lap, pointed to Ethan, and said in her small, clear voice, "Papa." The courtroom gasped. The mayor's face darkened, his fists clenched on the table. Rebecca began to cry again, whispering, "She's happy. She's safe. Please, Father, don't take her." But the mayor stood, slamming his cane on the floor. "You are weak, Rebecca. This family doesn't bend to emotion." Judge Collins raised his gavel sharply. "That's enough, Mr. Whitmore." The baby giggled suddenly, the sound cutting through the tension like sunlight through clouds. Even the judge smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he said, "the truth doesn't need words." As the court adjourned for the day, Ethan carried Hope out into the hallway. Sarah followed, her voice trembling. "Do you think we have a chance?" Ethan looked at her, eyes steady. "We don't just have a chance, Sarah. We have her." But just as they stepped outside, a man in a gray suit brushed past them, whispering into a phone. "Yes, Mr. Mayor. Everything's set. If the court doesn't go our way tomorrow, we'll make sure it never gets that far." Ethan turned, sensing something wrong, but the man was already gone. The next morning, Ashton Valley awoke to a storm that refused to move on. The courthouse windows rattled as thunder rolled across the plains, mirroring the tension that hung in the air. Inside, Ethan Crawford held Hope close, while Sarah Monroe whispered soft prayers under her breath. The verdict was only hours away, but something in Ethan's gut felt wrong, like the calm before a Texas twister. Out in the parking lot, a sleek black car idled with its engine running. Inside sat Dale Rourke, the man the mayor had once paid to make a problem disappear. His hands trembled around the steering wheel, a bottle of cheap whiskey half empty on the seat. He hadn't slept in days, haunted by the sound of that baby's cry echoing in his dreams. When the mayor's aide appeared beside his window, pressing an envelope into his hand, Dale shook his head. "I'm done. I can't do this no more." "Then you'd better disappear," the aide hissed, "before he makes you the next problem." Dale's eyes flicked toward the courthouse doors. Rain blurred his vision, but he saw Ethan, tall, steady, carrying that same baby he'd once thrown into a creek. Something in him broke. He started the car and slammed his foot on the gas. Inside, Ethan turned just in time to hear the screech of tires. He spun, pushing Sarah and Hope aside as the black sedan skidded to a stop inches from the steps. Dale stumbled out, soaked and shaking. "She's alive. I couldn't kill her," he sobbed. He paid me. He paid me to drown her." Gasps rippled through the crowd gathering under umbrellas. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. The sheriff shoved through the people, grabbing Dale by the arm. "Who paid you?" "Charles Whitmore," Dale shouted, voice raw with guilt. "He said no one could ever find her. But she..." She wouldn't stop crying. Before the sheriff could lead him away, Dale thrust a small recorder into his hand. He told me everything's on this. Every word. I can't carry it anymore. By the time Ethan looked back, reporters were already shouting questions, flashes going off like lightning. Hours later, the recording played in the judge's chamber. The voice of Mayor Whitmore filled the room, cold and unmistakable. Make it clean. No witnesses. The less noise, the better. Judge Collins's expression hardened. Issue a warrant. Immediately. That night, as the storm finally cleared, Ethan sat on the porch of Willow Haven Ranch, holding Hope, while Sarah leaned against him. The baby slept peacefully, unaware that justice had just begun to turn in her favor. Sarah whispered, "It's over, isn't it?" Ethan shook his head slowly, eyes on the dark horizon. Not yet. When men like Whitmore start losing power, they don't go quietly. From miles away, behind the bars of his dark study, Charles Whitmore watched the breaking news, his own voice replaying over and over on the screen. His glass shattered against the floor. "If they think I'm finished," he growled, "they don't know me at all." 2 weeks later, the state capitol in Austin buzzed like a hornet's nest. Every TV station in Texas had set up cameras outside the courthouse. The headlines read, "Mayor Whitmore, on trial for attempted murder." Inside, the air was thick, with the scent of rain and tension. Ethan Crawford sat in the back row beside Sarah Monroe, both holding Hope close beneath a soft blanket. They hadn't come for revenge, they came for closure. When the bailiff called the court to order, Charles Whitmore entered in handcuffs, his silver hair slicked back, chin high. The man who once ruled Ashton Valley now looked like a monument crumbling under its own pride. The prosecution began with the evidence. The recording Dale Rourke had handed over before taking his own life in a jail cell the week prior. His suicide note read only 4 words. "The baby lived. Forgive me." As the tape played, Whitmore's voice filled the room again. Cold. Commanding. Calculating. Make it clean. No witnesses. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Rebecca Whitmore buried her face in her hands, sobbing. When she finally took the stand, her voice trembled. "He told me the baby died. I believed him. I spent months grieving while he planned her death." She looked directly at her father. "You taught me to be ashamed of love. But that little girl you tried to kill is love itself." Whitmore's attorney objected, but the judge waved it off. "Let her speak." Ethan felt Sarah's hand tighten around his. They didn't need to say anything. Rebecca's courage was doing what years of silence could not, breaking the Whitmore dynasty in front of the world. When the defense tried to paint Ethan as a manipulative opportunist, he rose from his seat. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "I didn't save that child for headlines. I did it because I couldn't save my own. Maybe God gave me another chance to get it right." The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. After 4 days of testimony, the jury returned. The foreman's voice was steady. "We find the defendant, Charles Whitmore, guilty on all counts." A ripple of shock swept through the room. Rebecca broke down, whispering, "It's over." As Whitmore was led away, he turned his head toward Ethan and Sarah, hatred twisting his face. "Enjoy your miracle," he spat. "Miracles don't last." Outside, cameras flashed. The people of Ashton Valley cheered as Ethan and Sarah stepped out. Hope nestled in her arms. Reporters shouted questions, but Ethan just smiled faintly. "We didn't come here to win," he said. "We came here to end something and to start again." That night, back at Willow Haven Ranch, Hope toddled across the floor for the first time, clapping her hands and laughing. Sarah knelt, tears in her eyes. "She's walking, Ethan," he nodded, watching the little girl who had changed everything. "Yeah," he whispered. "And so are we." But as the moon rose over the ranch, A letter lay unopened on their doorstep, sealed with the crest of Rebecca Whitmore. Inside waited 7 handwritten words that would change their lives again. I need to tell you the truth. Spring came early to Ashton Valley, painting the pastures gold and green. The town that once whispered behind Ethan Crawford's back now waved when he passed. The baby from the creek had become a symbol of something rare in this world. Hope that survived the fire. Inside Willow Haven Ranch, laughter replaced the silence that had haunted Ethan for years. Sarah Monroe hung laundry on the porch, while Hope, now 2, ran barefoot in the grass chasing butterflies. The letter from Rebecca Whitmore still sat on Ethan's desk, opened, read, and forgiven. Rebecca had written of her guilt, of nights she woke hearing the child's cry in her dreams. "You saved what I was too afraid to fight for," she wrote. "All I ask is to see her smile once, from a distance." Ethan granted that wish. On a quiet afternoon, Rebecca visited the ranch. Hope didn't know who she was, but she handed her a wildflower and giggled. Rebecca wept softly, whispering, "Thank you." Then she left, lighter than she came. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Ethan stood with Sarah by the fence line. "You ever think," he asked, "that maybe we were meant to find her?" Sarah smiled, eyes glimmering. "I think she found us." A week later, Ethan took her hand across the breakfast table. "Sarah, you've given Hope what I couldn't even give my own family a home. And you gave me something I thought I'd buried." She looked up, puzzled. "What's that?" "Faith," he said simply. Then he knelt beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I lost a wife once. I never thought I'd have the courage to love again. But if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure neither of you ever doubt that you're safe." Sarah gasped, tears spilling before she even saw the ring. "Ethan, marry me," he whispered. Hope, sensing something special, toddled over and placed her tiny hand on top of theirs. "Mama, Papa," that sealed it. Their wedding was simple, a white chapel, sunlight spilling through stained glass, the scent of wildflowers drifting through open doors. The whole town came. Rebecca sat in the third pew, smiling through her tears. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Hope squealed from her seat by the aisle. "Mama, Papa." The crowd laughed and applauded. As they exchanged vows, Ethan's voice cracked. "You and Hope turned my ashes into light," he said. "You didn't just save a child, Sarah. You saved me." Sarah brushed a tear from his cheek. "And you taught me that love doesn't end, it begins again." Outside, bells rang, and petals filled the air. Ethan lifted Hope into his arms, while Sarah laughed beside him, radiant beneath the Texas Sunday. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't look over his shoulder. The past had finally stopped chasing him. But as dusk fell and music echoed from the church hall, a messenger arrived with a thick envelope from Austin. It bore the seal of the state courthouse and a single stamped word across the top: "Custody review." Ethan's smile faded as he exchanged a look with Sarah. "Looks like our story's not over yet." Snow dusted the fences of Willow Haven Ranch, turning the Texas plains silver under the early winter moon. Inside, a fire crackled, while Ethan Crawford read aloud from a storybook, his voice soft and warm. Sarah sat nearby, sewing a quilt covered in wildflower patterns. Between them, Hope, now 7 years old, leaned sleepily against her father's arm. "Daddy," she murmured, "tell me the real story, the one about how you found me. And, 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 be, and, 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 true." Ethan glanced at Sarah. Her eyes met his with that same knowing smile she'd worn since the day they pulled Hope from the creek. He closed the book and nodded. "All right, sunshine, He told it like he always did, how he heard a cry on the wind that morning by Willow Creek, how his hands shook when he opened the burlap sack, how that little voice said mama and woke up a broken man's heart. But tonight, Hope didn't just listen. She asked questions. "Did my first mama love me?" she whispered. Sarah's needle paused. "She did, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. She was scared and hurt, and some people made terrible choices for her. But she loved you enough to let us love you too." Hope's blue eyes glistened in the firelight. "So I have two mamas?" Sarah smiled gently. "Two mamas, one miracle." Ethan chuckled softly. "And a father who got lucky twice." Hope giggled. But her laughter faded as she spotted something in the corner of the room. A wooden chest she'd never opened. "What's in there?" Ethan hesitated. Then he rose, brought the chest to the rug, and opened it. Inside lay a small weathered piece of burlap and a silver locket engraved with the letter R. "This was with you that day," he said quietly. "And this," he handed her the locket, "belonged to your first mother, Rebecca. She wanted you to have it when you were ready." Hope traced the letter with her small finger. "Where is she now?" Sarah's voice softened. "She teaches in Dallas. She visits sometimes, though you might not remember. She always sits in the back of the church, watching you sing." Hope's throat tightened. "Can we write to her?" Ethan's smile wavered, pride and sorrow tangled in his voice. "I think she'd like that more than anything." They sat together in silence for a long moment, the fire popping, snow tapping against the windows. Hope leaned her head on Sarah's shoulder. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. Ethan kissed her hair. "No, sweetheart, you found us." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of church bells from Ashton Valley. Hope's eyelids grew heavy. Her locket clutched against her chest. As she drifted to sleep, Sarah brushed a tear from her cheek and whispered to Ethan, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gone to the creek that morning?" He looked into the flames, then back at his wife and child. "No," he said softly, "because I think God knew I needed saving just as much as she did." In the glow of the fire, the camera would linger on the family framed in light, three souls stitched together by love, loss, and grace. And outside, the sign at the ranch gate swayed gently in the wind. It read, "Willow Haven, where hope lives." The Creek and the Billionaire isn't just a story about a man rescuing a child. It's a reflection of how love, compassion, and redemption can rebuild a shattered life. It reminds us that family isn't defined by blood, but by the courage to love when it's easier to stay closed. Ethan Crawford's journey from loneliness to purpose shows that healing often begins when we reach beyond ourselves to save another soul. Sarah Monroe embodies quiet resilience, proving that grief doesn't end us. It teaches us how deeply we can care. And little Hope, the baby found in a burlap sack, becomes the living symbol of grace, fragile, unwanted by the world, yet strong enough to save two broken hearts. This story speaks to every adult who has faced loss, guilt, or regret. It whispers that even in our darkest valleys, a single act of kindness can open the door to light. It challenges the idea that wealth or power defines worth, and celebrates the simple truth that love, steady, imperfect, and brave, is the greatest inheritance we can offer. In the end, The Creek and the Billionaire reminds us that miracles don't always fall from heaven. Sometimes they wash up quietly at our feet, waiting to be held.